Hey, Richard.
Hey, Isa, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, good. Pull a chair. What's up?
Thanks. Well, as you know, I've been working on designing and curating some learning products for the Digital Academy's foundations tier. And there's already some great projects taking off, and I'm really excited about that. But at the same time, I need a framework. I need to work on a framework of the topics we're going to address at the foundational level, because the terrain is so vast when we talk about digital skills, foundational digital skills. And you know, it's not only about learning how to use the technologies, but it's also about having the right mindset, having an open and curious mindset, and continually wanting to learn more about tech innovations and existing technologies that can help us do our job better. So I know that you're working more from the leadership tier, and I was wondering maybe if we can look at the framework I'm building and some of the linkages with the leadership stream.
Yeah, well, from the sounds of it, leaders, like anyone else, will have to deal with foundational learning for sure. But I think the little addition will be how collectively we can make sense of this and think and work digital going in the future.
Yeah. So let me share my screen.
Okay.
And I've got a little bit of a diagram to help us, though it's nothing official, but a good starting point for the discussion. So where I started off is with core competencies, which I have an inventory of, and I've split into 3 categories. So personal competencies, interpersonal competencies, and organizational competencies. I have some examples here. So what do you think about these core competencies? Are there any missing? Do they apply from a leadership perspective as well?
Yeah, well, I recognize some words that actually people can probably find in the leadership competencies already established. So these leadership competencies are applied in a digital world, in a digital movement, but they're all really recognizable. So you know, leaders are people too, as I said. Foundational learning on those areas will be essential for leaders, and leaders will have to add to that with a bit of foresight and leading people towards the new culture that we need to create.
Yeah, absolutely. Then I've added in a layer of digital skills. So these digital skills can stem from the core competencies, and really I have 10 icons here that represent the 10 digital standards from the Canadian Digital Services. Some examples are iterate and improve frequently, be good data stewards, design with users. And so I've included those because I think you know, these standards represent what we need to strive for as public servants, as government, when we design services and processes. So I think they're an important part of this framework.
Yeah, from a leadership perspective, let's think of those standards as a frame of reference, which will help projects along, will probably become means test on whether or not we have done our work. So leaders will pay attention to those standards from their perspective, making sure that results intended are results achieved.
Yeah. So under these 10 digital skills, there's a ton of foundational learning that's represented under each of them. So I've decided to break it up into 4 overarching learning categories, so to speak. So the first one, the first category that I included is trends. Now, I identified that because it encompasses not only learning about new tools that are out there, but it also means learning about what trends and innovations are happening in the world, public, private sectors, other governments, within our own government departments as well. I think it's important that we learn from others, we learn from what's happening out there, and we keep an eye out for these seeds of innovation, and that we use them as well.
Yeah, and I think from generally speaking, certainly from the lens of a leader, these antennas up messages will have to be repeated again and again. We no longer can afford as workers to wait for the bosses to tell us what's going on. We will each have to really put our antennas up and keep track of these trends. Leaders, the additional thing about leaders, they will need to be a bit more forward-looking to see where these trends are roughly leading us, just to give a bit more meaning and sense of the direction that we should all work for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The next category that I added is tech. There are a lot of existing technologies out there that can help us do our jobs better, that can help us provide better services. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, augmented and virtual reality, new coding languages, just, to name a few. And the average public servant out there sitting behind their computer at their desk thinks that these don't apply to them. And that's false. I couldn't help thinking about my brother-in-law who was over at my house just last week, and he asked me to help him fill out a government form because it was just frustrating and confusing to him. And I did, and I found it to be a painful experience as well. And I couldn't help thinking that with a little bit of innovation, that whole process, that whole form could be a whole lot easier to manage and give the citizen, the user, a much better experience. So I think that we need to, look at these different technologies and look at how we can change our way of working and of designing our services.
Yeah, you're quite right. An example, artificial intelligence was not that long ago conceived as a term that people link to sci-fi, down really down the future. But artificial intelligence is already here. There are already some instances of artificial intelligence being used in some of the projects in government, and it's only starting. So from a leadership perspective, technology where it will be, and make sense of it, and the best tools that need to be used in order to convert our services to a more digital environment. Yes.
Yes, absolutely. It's already happening, I know. The third category I added is design. So I'm not talking about graphic design here, but the processes we use to design. I'm talking about how we design services, processes, policies, and how they need to be more citizen-centered, how we need to be using more structured approaches to design, like design thinking, like user experience design, like usability testing, and all that to help us be more inclusive and more accessible for the people that we serve. So I also in that include agile design. So I know you'll agree that we probably need to be a lot more agile in the way that we design and develop within government.
Yeah, I think we'll have first to understand what the design thinking and agile means. So we'll spend a lot of learning, I think, altogether to find our way through all this. Design and agility evokes terms or images of loose cannons, sometimes very creative people, not certain about the results. As a matter of fact, there are rigorous processes and methods attached to them. So once we get comfortable with those new ways of doing things to achieve our results, I think the cultural shift will take place much more easily. And don't forget that in the 10 digital standards, many of those standards actually could work in a non-digital environment. There are just different ways to collaborate and involve users in defining services for the future. Whether they will be digital or not doesn't really matter. There's just new ways of doing things.
Good point. Thanks. Fourth category is Gov, because let's face it, we work in government. It's a context that we cannot lose sight of. We have security and privacy and compliance obligations that we must respect. And sometimes there's a need to have them innovate alongside the services, the new services that we design. What do you think?
Well, we are all public servants. We work for an institution called the Public Service. We're accountable to Canadians to serve them well. So yes, it makes sense. We always have to think in terms of the government's role, the public service role, but not forgetting that we won't do it alone. And that's why we need to be inclusive of other sectors of society, private sector, not-for-profit. And that's why we need to be collaborative in our ways of doing things.
Awesome. Well, there you have it. Again, nothing official, but I'm iterating a little bit here and thinking things through with this framework. Thanks so much for sharing your thoughts and your expertise from a leadership perspective on this.
Hey, anytime, and I look forward in the next few weeks. I'm sure you'll have a different versions, and that's the name of the game. More versions, and the better the product.
There you go.
Okay then.
Bye. Take care.
See you. Bye.